social unrest on the streets of the French capital. Anti-government protesters clashed with police, blocked roads and started fires. Others were met with water cannons and tear gas in rallies across the country.
We feel like our voices aren't being heard.
80,000 officers responded to the grassroots movement known as Let's Block Everything. Much of their fury is a reaction to the deepening inequality in France, blamed on President Emmanuel Macron's plans to curb the country's skyrocketing debt.
What happens when the man who calls himself the defender of democracy abroad suddenly finds his own people setting his streets on fire? What does it mean when a president who flies to Africa to lecture leaders about legitimacy cannot convince his own citizens he deserves to stay in power? Well, as of now, Paris is no longer the postcard of elegance that Macron sells to the world. It is barricades, buses burning, train lines cut, and teenagers chanting, "Macron must go," under clouds of tear gas. France is living the very chaos it condemns in others. And the cry is deafening: block everything. The question that now hangs like smoke over the Élysée palace is simple. How long can Emmanuel Macron ignore a nation that has already decided it does not want him? In this video, let's understand what has happened and where all that is leading. On the morning of September 10, 2025, France woke to the kind of tension that is felt in the stomach before it is seen in the streets. For weeks, social media had carried hashtags urging citizens to block everything, but many wondered whether this call would really paralyze the country. By mid-morning, the answer was clear. From Paris to Rennes, Nantes to Montpellier, barricades went up, tires and bins were set ablaze, buses torched, and rail traffic disrupted by deliberate sabotage of electrical lines in the southwest. Tear gas filled city squares as riot police tried to disperse groups that reformed minutes later around another corner. It was less a centralized insurrection than a wave of rolling disruptions that tested the state's ability to control public space. Interior Ministry figures put the turnout at close to 200,000 people, while unions and sympathetic observers claimed as many as 250,000. The government tried to spin the day as a defeat for the protesters, arguing that the country had not been completely brought to a halt. But the reality captured on camera told a different story. Hundreds of protest sites, 450 arrests, more than a dozen injured officers, and whole sectors of daily life suspended in uncertainty. Even where life continued, it did so under a blanket of unease, with helicopters overhead and armored vehicles at intersections. France did not fully stop, but for a day it looked ungovernable, and that was enough to send shockwaves through the presidency. But to understand why the block everything call ignited so dramatically, one has to look at the political ground already soaked in discontent. Just 2 days before the protests, Prime Minister François Bayrou, the fourth head of government since 2022, was forced out after losing a parliamentary vote of confidence. The trigger was his attempt to pass a sweeping austerity program worth 44 billion euros in budget cuts. Among its most controversial elements were proposals to abolish 2 public holidays, freeze pensions, and introduce other reductions that opponents argued would fall hardest on workers and the elderly. Bayrou's fall was not an isolated accident, but part of a pattern. Macron's second term had already been scarred by the forced passage of pension reforms in 2023, a decision that inflamed unions and triggered weeks of unrest. Combined with the fragmented parliament born out of Macron's gamble on snap elections, governing had become an exercise in crisis management. When Bayrou fell, Macron replaced him almost immediately with Sébastien Lecornu, his loyal defense minister and close ally. But for the public, this was less a fresh start than confirmation of their worst suspicion. The president was determined to impose continuity no matter how loudly voters said no. The streets did not wait to give their answer. The Block Everything movement did not spring from traditional party structures. It was born online in May 2025, initially amplified by right-wing networks frustrated with Macron's fiscal policy. But like dry kindling, it was quickly seized by the left and far left, by unions, and finally by students who brought energy and numbers. By September, it had become a broad, leaderless coalition, united not by ideology, but by anger at austerity and at a political class seen as detached from ordinary life. Its slogans of boycott, civil disobedience, and solidarity spread virally across platforms, giving the campaign a decentralized structure that was harder for the state to suppress. When Le Cornu entered Matignon on September 10th, the streets were already primed with barricades. The faces were younger than those who defined the Yellow Vest revolt of 2018 and 2019, but the charge was familiar: a ruling elite that imposes sacrifices while shielding itself from consequences. The very absence of a single leader made the protests harder to dismiss. Anyone could pick up the banner, anyone could declare a blockade, and thousands did. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. Behind the anger lies arithmetic that refuses to disappear. France's public debt had swollen to around 114% of GDP, while the annual deficit approached twice the 3% ceiling imposed by European Union rules. Markets had grown restless, demanding higher yields to lend to Paris. And the European Central Bank, under Christine Lagarde, made it clear there would be no shortcut to relief. France must respect EU fiscal constraints. This reality cornered the government. To reassure markets and comply with Brussels, deep cuts were needed. But every attempt to implement them inflamed the electorate. Bayrou's defeat and the fury in the streets were not over abstractions. They were the direct result of policies designed to fix balance sheets by thinning social protections. Macron's calculation that financial stability required austerity clashed with the lived experience of families facing higher costs, frozen pensions, and fewer benefits. In such an environment, each new fiscal announcement acted like a match in a room already filled with gas. Interestingly, Sébastien Lecornu's first day as Prime Minister was supposed to symbolize stability after Bayrou's fall. Instead, it placed him squarely at the epicenter of crisis. His immediate task was to assemble a coalition capable of passing a budget. But the arithmetic of Parliament is unforgiving. On the left, socialists and Greens demanded new revenue through wealth taxation to preserve social protections. On the right, conservatives insisted on deeper cuts without tax increases. Between them, no clear majority emerged. Marine Le Pen's national rally, emboldened by Macron's unpopularity, warned that if Le Cornu simply recycled Macronist policies, they would move to bring him down as swiftly as his predecessor. Thus, Le Cornu entered office already squeezed. He represented continuity with Macron, an asset for the president, but a liability with the public. His early signals suggested he might soften the sharpest edges of austerity, perhaps abandoning the holiday abolition and adjusting the pension freeze. But such compromises risk alienating the right while failing to satisfy the left, leaving him stranded in a parliament where no one wants to own the pain. The stalemate in the legislature mirrored the anger on the street, and both reinforced one another. Interestingly, the state's immediate response to the September 10th protests was overwhelming force. Between 80,000 and 100,000 police were deployed nationwide. They dismantled barricades, used water cannons to clear highways, and blanketed urban squares with tear gas. Tactically, the police succeeded in ensuring that France was not completely immobilized. By midnight, many of the blockades were cleared, but strategically, the response failed. You cannot decapitate a movement that has no head. Block Everything was leaderless, horizontal, and flexible. Each crackdown in one area prompted another flare-up elsewhere. Arrests numbered in the hundreds, but they did not dent the overall energy of the revolt. Worse for the state, unions signaled that they might formally join the next round. If that happens, sporadic barricades could evolve into organized strikes in transport, education, and energy sectors, magnifying the disruption. France has been through this rhythm before. Suppress one day of protests only to face a larger, better organized wave the following week. Now, for observers in Africa, the sight of Macron struggling with legitimacy at home carries a special resonance. The French president has often positioned himself as Europe's voice on democracy, chastising African governments for failing to respect popular will, condemning coups in the Sahel, and insisting that France represents a higher standard of governance. Yet the images from Paris tell a different story. Riot police clashing with students, governments collapsing under no-confidence votes, and a president pushing policies rejected by the majority. The contradiction is hard to miss. If democracy is the will of the people, then what does it mean when a leader ignores mass protests, refuses to dissolve parliament, and replaces ousted ministers with close allies? Africans who have heard Macron's lectures about legitimacy now ask a pointed question. What model is France actually exporting? The message resonates beyond symbolism. If Paris cannot stabilize its own politics without force, how credible is its claim to guide others? For many Africans, the lesson is not to emulate Macron's style of democracy, but to recognize that Western leaders face their own crises of consent. Now, the future of France in the wake of September 10th appears to lie along three uncertain paths. The first is a managed retreat. Lecornu could trim the most unpopular elements of the austerity package, court moderate socialists and Republicans, and pass a narrower budget that reassures markets while calming some of the public anger. This would buy time, but it would not solve the deeper structural question of who bears the cost of adjustment. Unrest would likely return when the next round of cuts is proposed. The second is a street veto. If unions formally join, Block Everything could transform from sporadic flashpoints into rolling strikes. Parliament might then refuse to pass the budget, leading to another no-confidence vote. Macron would face a choice between dissolving Parliament, risking new elections that could empower either the left or the far right, or governing by constitutional maneuver, which would deepen the perception of illegitimacy and further spook investors. The third path is a political reset. Macron could bow to pressure and call new elections. This would allow a fresh alignment, but it would almost certainly represent a repudiation of Macronism. The left-wing New Popular Front or Marine Le Pen's national rally could emerge strengthened, reshaping France's fiscal and social policy for years. For Macron, this path is politically risky, but it may be the only way to restore legitimacy. What do you think? Is this just another protest cycle in France, or the beginning of Macron's downfall? Could the Block Everything movement grow into something that forces Macron out, or will he tighten his grip? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on how Macron can claim to teach democracy to Africa when his own people are setting Paris on fire to get rid of him. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.